So in the previous class, we are discussing about the, the constructors, that is the parameterized constructors. So we have studied the copy constructors, right? Then now, so what do you mean by overloaded constructor? So okay, overloaded constructor is nothing but the constructors when we are going to use more than one constructor in a program, then we call that is the overloaded constructors, right? You may be using the default constructor, or you may be using the parameterized constructors or copy constructor. If your program contains more than one uh, uh, constructor in a class, then we call it as the overloaded constructor. That is, so just like other member functions, constructors can also be overloaded. So okay, in fact, when you have both default and parameterized constructors, okay, defined in your class, you are having a overloaded constructor, one with no parameter, the other with a parameter, or you may have the combination of parameterized constructor or a copy constructor. You can have any number of constructor in a class that differ in a parameter list. Okay, so this is also called as a multiple constructors in a class. So the constructor itself supplies the data values and no values are passed by calling the program. The function call passes the appropriate values from the main. C++ permits us to both these constructors in the same class, right? Means C++ allows the user to define the different kinds of constructors in a single class. Okay, so we call that is called as the overloaded constructors, right? So now the overloaded constructors are the constructors where more than one constructor function is defined and declared in a class, we say that constructor is overloaded, right? Okay, so that is about the overloaded constructor. You can have any number of constructors in a class with a different parameters. Okay, so constructor with the default arguments, it is possible to define the constructor with the default argument. The constructor, for example, say the you take this example only. So class student. So this class student is having the data members, roll number and the name. Okay, string name. It is a group of characters. Okay, then the student, see there, name of the constructor is same as the class name. Then this will take one argument x, roll number is equal to x, name is equal to none. Then student int x comma string str, roll number is equal to x and name is equal to whatever the parameters it initializes or it we sends. Whenever we create object of the student, these two constructors are going to be executed automatically. See here, so it is a one parameter constructor, this is a two parameterized constructor. Okay, now this two parameters constructor, it is having the string as a one argument, the other is the roll number x. Whatever we are going to create or whatever we send as a parameter to the object, that the respective, so if you are going to send one parameter, then one parameter constructor is going to be invoked, right, or executed automatically. If you are sending two parameters, then the two parameterized constructor is going to be executed automatically. Okay, then it is going to assign the values to the x and str. In turn, the x is going to be assigned to the roll number and str is going to assign to the name. Okay, now see the in the above case we have defined two constructor with the different parameters. Hence, we call it as a overloading the constructor, because with the different parameters, we are going to use that. One more very important thing, if you define any constructors explicitly, then the compiler will not provide the default constructor and you will have to define it yourself. In the above case, if you write student as in main, it will lead to the compile time error because we haven't defined default constructor. Okay, and compiler will not provide its default constructor because we have defined other parameterized constructors. Okay, So we will see here there is no default constructor is defined. Okay, so here by default, okay, since we have other overloaded constructors, so we haven't defined the default constructor. The compiler will not provide its default constructor because we have defined other parameterized constructors. Okay, so here we are using more than one constructor in this program. Okay, one is the one parameter constructor and the other with the two parameterized constructor. Suppose I am going to give student no parameters, then that is called as a default constructor. When you are going to define or declare a constructor of such, then it initializes its data members to 0. That is, a roll number is equal to 0 and name is null character because name is a string. Okay, now the output, see here, in the main program, just see here, student A is an object which is created under the student and it takes one parameter. Student B, say it takes two parameters, 11 and the name is a string, right? Ram. Okay. So when B is created, the object B is created and the student, it is the two parameter constructor is going to be executed automatically. Then the output, suppose I am going to use a member function to display the roll number of a student and the name of a student, right? It is going to display then roll number is equal to 10 and the name is equal to the Ram. Okay, when we are going to trying to print the A dot display, it is going to print only the roll number because we are sending only one parameter, right? And name is going to none. None is nothing but a null character. Okay, and when the object B dot display is used, it is going to print the roll number as 11 and the name of a student as a Ram. So in the above case, as I told, it is a overloading the constructor because we have used and declared, defined more than one constructor. That's why it is called as a overloaded constructor. As I told, the constructor, you can have any number of constructors in a class, right? And but there is a destructor, that is also a special member function, but you can have only one destructor in a class. So what happens, see, dynamic initialization of the objects. See, people are already familiar with the dynamic initialization of the variables. What do you mean by dynamic initialization of the variables? The variables which are initialized and declared at the same time. We call it as a dynamic initialization of the variables. Similarly, we have dynamic initialization of the objects, right? The class objects can be initialized dynamically too. That is to say that the initial object may be providing during the runtime. One advantage of dynamic initialization is that we can provide various initialization formats, right? Using the overloaded constructor. This provides the flexibility of using different format of date at runtime depending upon the situation. So okay. So it depends upon the situation how we are going to use the format of the data. So this is called as a dynamic initialization of the objects. When the objects are initialized automatically during execution time, then we call that as the dynamic initialization of the object. Okay, that is about the dynamic initialization of the objects. Okay, so we come to the dynamic constructors. So what the dynamic initialization object is done during the runtime, then we call that is a dynamic initialization of the objects. So you must understand what do you mean by dynamic constructors. So it is not the constructors can also be used to allocate the memory while creating the objects. This will enable the system to allocate the right amount of the memory for each object when the objects are not of the same size, thus resulting in the saving of memory. Allocation of memory to objects at the time of their constructor is known as the construction of objects. The memory allocated with the help of a new operator. So it is called as a constructor that is used in constructing the objects. Okay, we call when we are going to use a new operator to to constructor to initialize the values. That means we are going to create a memory space for the objects during the runtime for the constructors. Then we call this is a dynamic constructors, right? Dynamic initialization is different and dynamic constructors is different. Okay, dynamic initialization means until the runtime the values of the objects is not known, and at the time of the execution, right? So we are going to initialize the values. Okay, whatever we are going to do during the runtime, then we call that as the dynamic initialization of the dynamic initialization of the objects. Okay, so next is we'll take the next so like how we are going to use the constructors for constructing the values. Similarly, so there is a function, special member function called as a destructor, which is going to help for the memory management, especially saves the memory of your computer. So which are the how many constructors you are using and what are the data members you are using, all that can be released back to your memory of the computer after using those data, right? That means this destructor function is going to work after the execution, after the end of the program. When you are going to close that particular program, then only the destructor function is going to release that memory space occupied by the constructor to your computer. Okay, destructor is a special class function. So here destructor is also a special member function like a constructor. Okay, destructor is the special member function. Okay, so it is a special function or a special member function because a constructor, as the name implies, is used to destroy the objects that are being created by the constructor. Okay, like the a constructor, we have the destructor is a member function whose name is also same as a class name but preceded by a tilde operator. I think that key you can see along with that apostrophe. That is the number one key. Next to that previous key will be the tilde operator key. Okay, so how we are going to differentiate the constructor and destructor function? Okay, because constructor function is also same as a class name and destructor function is also same name as a class, then how we are going to identify the difference between the constructor and destructor. So in both are having the same name. Okay, so to initial to say that the destructor function is prefixed by the tilde operator. Okay, so the destructor never takes any argument, nor does it return any value. Okay, so constructor is what? It constructs the values, it takes the parameters, it will not return value, no problem, right? Whereas this the destructor function will not take any argument, even it will not return any value also. Okay, it will not return any value. So it returns any value, it will be it or invoked implicitly by the compiler upon exit from the program or block or function, as the case may be, to clean up the storage that is not longer accessible. It is a good practice to declare a constructor in a program, since it releases the memory space for the future use. So whenever a new is used to allocate a memory in a constructor, we should use a delete to free the memory. Okay. So whereas whenever you are going to create a constructor, then we need to use whenever we are going to use a constructor, we have to use a destructor function to release the memory space occupied by the constructor. It is a very good practice, because the memory space occupied by the constructor, we have to manage the memory. So as you people know that the memory plays very important role in computer. How I'll tell you. Okay, how means say for example, you are doing some work, you are creating some database, you are storing some information, right? So if you don't have any space in the memory of your computer, then you are going to suffer a lot, because you're done a lot of work, but there is no memory to store your information in a computer. Then what is the use of that? Okay, so that is why some are virulent possible to release after usage of that particular block of memory. Viral is possible for us to remove the data from the memory, right? We have to use the programming concepts to release back the memory space to your memory management system. Okay, here the C++ is a very nice feature. They added the destructors and the delete operator. Okay, so we are using the new operator to allocate memory dynamically. Okay, so after usage of that space, right, I can release that back to the memory management system. Okay, for a future use. So I use a delete operator to delete the memory space. Similarly, constructor function, I can use a destructor function to release the memory space occupied by the constructor function. So one more very important thing is that, so as I told that any number of constructors you can have in your program, but only one destructor should be present. Only one destructor. Any number of constructor you can use. That is overloaded constructor concept, right? But you can use only one destructor in a class. A class constructor is called every time an object is created. Similarly, as the program control leaves the current block, of the objects in the block start getting destroyed, and the destructors are called for each one of them. Okay, note that the objects are destroyed in the reverse order of the creation. Finally, when the main block is the exited, okay, destructors are called corresponding to the remaining objects present inside the main. Similarly, functionality as depicted, it can be attained by using the static data members with the constructors and the destructors. We can declare the static variables count inside the class to keep track of the number of objects instance, and then the variable will be initialized only once. Okay, so the similarly the constructor will increment and count by 1. Similarly, constructor will decrement count variable 1 and when the objects got destroyed. Okay, so the destructor function here, example class A. So destructor is a special member function because it is same as a class name. Even the destructor also must be declared in the public section of the class itself. It cannot be static, right? And it cannot be virtual. The destructor will not be a virtual. Okay, so is a scope of the soon as the scope of the object ends, the destructor is called automatically by the compiler when the object goes out of the scope. That is, say for example, particular block you are using some object, right? So when you are going to terminate that object, so automatically your that particular object is going to be destroyed if you have a destructor in your program. The syntax for the destructor is same as for the constructor. The class name is used as a name of a destructor with a prefixing by the tilde operator. Okay. See here example class A, beginning of that class declaration public tilde operator A. Okay, then see closing of that. Destructors will never have any arguments, as I told. Even it will not take any argument, and it will not return any value like a constructor. See example for constructors and destructor is called, say class A constructor, cout constructor is called. I am going to use a destructor function. See the difference. Say the destructor is prefixed with the tilde operator, and constructor function there is no say tilde operator. Since both functions does not return any value, no return type is mentioned. Both are a special member functions only. So now destructor is called. Say now main object A, object 1, constructor is called. Int x, if x A object 2, constructor is called. Then destructor is called object 2 and object 1. See there. Why it has given like this means because see how the objects is going to release back the memory to operating system. Say at the end from the bottom of your program, the object 2 is created last, right? But that is the one which is going to release the memory space first. Okay, so destructor called for the object 2, and after that the object 1 is going to be released. The memory space of the object 1 will be released. Okay, so as I told, the memory space in which the objects in which it is created, the reverse order, the release of the memory space is done by the destructor function only when you are going to come out of that particular program. Okay, so that is what we call it as the destructor function. Okay, so that completes your first that is the this one first unit, that is module 1. So now important questions are given. State the important features of the object oriented programming concepts, the comparison between C and C++, right? And so some of the questions related to your the program, that is the uh, constructors also. What is nested class? What is its use? Explain with example. Static data members, explain with example. Okay, so those and all you can prepare well. Destructors are both are special member functions, and they perform constructor function constructs and it occupies some memory space, whereas destructor function though it destroys the memory space occupied by the constructor function. Okay, that is what we can say. It is a constructor and the destructor functions. Okay, so